Thanks, Joe, and thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for having me here tonight. As mentioned, my name's Carlita Warren. I'm the Policy and Public Affairs Director at RCA, and I've worked in the industry both front of house, back of house, and now on the policy side of things as well. So I guess giving you an overview of where we see, where operators struggle the most, and I guess a few tips in terms of how you may be able to bring those stress levels down a little bit. So what I thought I might first do is basically take you through who RCA is. So RCA was actually founded in 1922 by cafe and restaurant owners and operators. And the reason they founded RCA was basically as a way of sharing information about getting together and discussing issues that were affecting their business, and then providing a single voice back to government. So over time, we've developed into an industry association that basically advocates your needs to government, but then also provides support to you whether or not you're starting, you're trying to operate your business, or you're trying to grow. And I think one of the key points to make, we're talking about the rise of an empire, and from our perspective, we watch what's happening in industry. So I thought I might spend a few minutes explaining why our sector is important and why we're actually seeing our sector being considered an empire. And the first explanation I would probably give to you is that we are the largest employer in the tourism industry. So sometimes when we're talking about the tourism industry, we talk about the airlines, we talk about the cruise ships. We are actually the largest employer in that sector. And from a government perspective, when you're talking about employment, that's the reason why they listen to us as a sector. From a more, granular point of view, from a New South Wales perspective, most of the employment is in New South Wales, and most of that employment will be in the CBD, in the Sydney area. So hence the reason why forums like this are so important. Another point when we sort of look at the numbers, it's a $14 billion industry. And that can be broken down into both cafe and restaurant turnover, but then also your takeaway industry as well. But we're also the largest contributor to the nighttime economy. You've probably heard a lot about the lockout laws and the late night economy. We are the largest contributor to that economy. Hence the reason, again, why we need to make sure our voice to government is strong. But what can you do as an operator? And I'll talk about this in terms of some of the tips, but know your industry trends, I would say. And not so much your trends, but know how the market is doing. Put your ear to the ground and understand what operators are sensing. This is something that we run every month. We provide it to our operators to give them a snapshot of where the market is sitting. We do this so that operators can say, hey, am I tracking with how the industry is tracking, or am I a little bit off, or am I doing better, and why may I be doing better? So you can actually see in December, so your Christmas trading period, we actually saw a little bit of a dip in New South Wales, but some of the larger markets in some of the other states actually did quite well. But what I'd probably draw your attention to is the takeaway market. So what we find is if we see a bit of a dip in cafe and restaurant turnover, we actually see a pickup in takeaway. So it's interesting to see how consumer dining may actually change sort of how the numbers are playing out. And I guess this brings me to my first point is know your market and know your industry trends. It doesn't necessarily mean follow them, but make sure you know them, because if you have an identity of your restaurant that you're trying to achieve, but that doesn't match what the market wants, it's going to be incredibly difficult to make your business operate. For example, some of the numbers are actually showing us that people are dining out more and more often, sometimes upwards of 3 or 4 times a month, but they may not necessarily be spending as much. Consumers are becoming more discerning with how they spend their money, and you need to be mindful of where they may be spending it. So we've actually seen a dip, and this may not apply to all restaurant operators, but we've seen a dip in spend in your upmarket restaurants, your cafe and your restaurant market. We've actually seen an uptake in some of more of those casual areas, such as takeaway. So this may not necessarily affect your business, but it's something to consider if you're putting together the base plan of who you're going to target and what they actually want. This brings me to my other point, is know your benchmarks. And this is probably more appropriate for people who've been in operation maybe 1 or 2 years, trying to work out, are we doing the right thing? We haven't really seen the profit that we were expecting. Should we be closing our doors? Should we push on? It's probably important, and I think to Joe's point, make sure you know and make sure you look at your numbers regularly. Don't put your head in the sand and expect, oh, I've got creditors calling me, but the money's coming in, so everything's sweet, because sometimes that's when you end up in trouble. One of the tips I would give you, I'd probably write this down, if you can Google ATO benchmarks restaurant, you'll find one of the categories that come up. The ATO actually does benchmarks, so they get all your information from your BAS statements, your GST statements, and they basically average out, okay, how is the industry performing and where do they sit in terms of their percentages? So these are the average numbers across the industry. They look at this mainly from an auditing perspective. So they have a look at this, and generally if a business falls outside some of these benchmarks, it sends red flags to them. Not necessarily for an audit, but it sends a flag to them that this business may be operating outside what it should be. If too many flags come up, that's generally when they'll approach you for an audit. But just from, I guess, if you're starting up, you're not sure where to start first, have a look at where they think the industry should be sitting. So in terms of your labour costs, your rent, your turnover, this is what they think should be where you should be sitting. But what our operators tell us is that the reality is not always like this. So we go out and we survey our members just to get an indication of how they're doing. How are your business costs sitting? Where should you be in the market? And sometimes this is the feedback that we get, that your staff costs can sometimes represent up to 45% of your business expenses. But you've got the ATO saying it should only be about 20 to 30%. So be mindful that what you're being told to do may not necessarily be applicable, but if you are starting to fall in these ranges, what can you do to try and bring it back into line before it gets out of hand? And you can actually see that thinner the edge of the wedge up there, that's your profit. So if you think that all this graph is going to be red and is going to be profit, you need to rethink exactly what the industry is going to be able to achieve for you. My second tip would be to Google Service New South Wales, open or grow a restaurant business. So this is more applicable for the guys who haven't even thought of starting in their business plan stage of everything. And you should come to a website that looks a little bit like this. And this is a great tool. We've actually worked with Service New South Wales to develop this tool. It is an easy step-by-step guide in terms of what are the fundamental things you should do if you're thinking of establishing a business. Everything from registering for GST, having an ABN, do you need a liquor license, do you need a DA approval? All these things will be outlined in different categories on this website, and I'd highly recommend you go there and just have a look. Have I done some of these things? Have there been things that I've missed? Service New South Wales is also trying to make this an automated process. So soon you should be able to lodge your DA application through this system. Soon you should be able to lodge your liquor license through this system. So it'll take some of the guesswork out of some of those steps you need to do in order to start your business. Again, if you're in the process, another big gripe that businesses have and continually tell us about is the time it takes to get a liquor license. I think people underestimate the time some of these approvals take. So one of the things that Liquor and Gaming New South Wales have actually done recently, they recognise that it's a pinch point for operators. So what they've actually done is brought into effect an interim restaurant authorisation. So if you Google this, you should come up with a fact sheet that looks something like this. And basically what that means is that if you lodge your liquor licence application, you're just a standard cafe or restaurant, you don't plan to operate outside sort of your midnight trading, so you're just your standard hours, and all your paperwork is in order, as soon as you lodge it, you can start serving alcohol. So gone are the days where you lodge your application and you must wait for the approval to come back, because keep in mind sometimes that can take up to 3 to 6 months. What they are saying now, given if your paperwork is all in order and they don't see any issues and they don't contact you, you can start serving alcohol from the day you've lodged that paperwork. So that takes a huge stress off your business, particularly, and again, coming back to the type of market you're trying to sort of reach. If your customer expects to be able to have a glass of wine, a whiskey at the end of the night, and you can't do that, that then eats into sort of your margins and where you may be able to I guess, achieve sort of some of your sales goals. So if you are having trouble with lodging your liquor license, if you are finding you're having delays, by all means, I would look into this process. And finally, the last point I would make is sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So again, coming back to Joe and Sarah's point, ask for advice and ask for it prior to opening the doors or prior to signing your lease. Because once you've done that, there's a commitment there and you have to try and make it work. And that's why RCA is around. So by all means, this is our phone number and our website. These are some of the things we help operators with on a day-to-day basis. What am I supposed to be paying my staff? Can I bring my costs down in some way, shape or form? How do I hire an overseas worker and how do I get assistance there? I need to do some training. I've never been in the industry before. What's an RSA? What sort of food safety courses do I need to do? So we provide this assistance to operators on a day-to-day basis. So if you have a question, it doesn't matter how weird and wonderful. I've had questions about, do I need to provide dogs water and biscuits in my restaurant if a customer wants to bring the dog into my restaurant? So we deal with everything weird and wonderful. So if you do have a question, by all means, give us a call because we're here to help. Thanks very much, guys.